Chair, gentlemen, thank you for being here. One thing the committee just wants to put on the table up front is that we accept the contention by CASA that there were errors made on behalf of the pilot in command of the flight. There seems to have been some concern raised that this inquiry is all about exonerating an individual and shifting blame elsewhere. That's not the case. We accept the fact that in the view of some it was even a violation as opposed to an error. But the concern of the committee is the fact that the question has to be asked, why was the error made? And that goes to the heart of the ATSB report and the information made available to it to pursue their investigations. It goes to the heart of the MOU between the two organisations, CASA and ATSB, the spirit and the letter of the MOU in terms of information that is made available. It's in that context that we continue our inquiries as we wish to make sure that the public can indeed have confidence in the two organisations and the oversight of aviation safety. Mr McCormick, to start off, can we go to your first supplemental submission to the inquiry, which is fairly pointed and strongly worded in rejecting the evidence of some other witnesses to the inquiry. And in paragraph 3.1, CASA, so this is 3.1 on your document, page 21, Nick. The contention from a witness was that CASA failed to provide adequate oversight of Pell Air operations. It's unlikely that deficiencies listed in the CASA special audit have materialised since the previous Pell Air OIC audit. And the statement is very blunt. CASA rejects this contention and a similar tone carries on. I draw your attention to an internal CASA report known as the Chambers report. The subject of that was Pell Air oversight conducted by a senior manager within your organisation. And in the executive summary, the first paragraph says that the findings of the audit identified serious deficiencies within the AOC. Further, it raised the question of the veracity of the oversight conducted by CASA. It also questions the effectiveness of the current oversight policies, surveillance tools and available resources. The committee is concerned that there appears to be a significant conflict between the stated rejection of some witnesses' evidence and the stated position of your own internal audit, which was not made public, nor was it made available to the ATSB. Would you care to provide the committee some more background on that?
Thank you, Senator. In 2009, when this unfortunate accident occurred, I commenced here in March 2009. We had introduced a new board in July 2009. We were in the middle of a restructuring, both in reporting lines and around our policies, processes and procedures. And at the time of this incident, of course, in November 2009, we were very much still in the mode of what we had been for the previous 4 or 5 years. The Chambers report, I actually directed operations.
What mode was that? What do you mean? You were in the same mode as 4 or 5 years. What mode was that?
Well, what I mean, Senator, is that the way we were conducting surveillance, the way we were organised, the way our officers were put in place, the way we had policies and processes and procedures were very much the legacy of our previous years. We had not done much fundamental change in the 7 months or so since I'd arrived before this accident had occurred.
Does that imply that they were faulty?
No, Senator, I don't think they were. And I think, as I said at estimates in May 2009 from memory, I think what had happened in the previous years is that there had been somewhat a bit of neglect in the way we went about our business, and that we were not necessarily organised in the best way to go forward, and we relied very much on subject matter experts. Now, that's not to say that's wrong, that we're in that respect, we're very much like other organisations around the world, other NAAs, all of which undergo continual renewal. CASA is an organisation that we had to put onto the correct footing. We had to move forward, build on the things that were right, and correct the things that we didn't think were working particularly well. At the same time, there were numerous other issues which we were dealing with. However, as I said, to get back to the Chambers report, I directed Mr Hood, who was then the Executive Manager Operations, to get an independent view internally of CASA for my information about how the organisation worked, whether our procedures were, the efficacy of them, and how we were doing that. Hence, you'll find the Chamber's report, I think, dates from about August of 2012 or 2010. We had to wait till the entire investigation had been finished from our point of view before we did the Chamber's report. So that report was actually intended for me. And I did say at the time I wanted warts and all. So I certainly didn't want to hold back to find out where we were going and how we were going forward. I don't think that, though, looking at the Chamber's report and many of the issues that were raised in the Chamber's report, we can go forward to and discuss individually if you wish. None of the things that appear there, if we go back to the accident, and I am cognisant, Senator Fawcett, of what you said, that the committee has reached a position, shall we say, in regards to the pilot of the aircraft. That report still doesn't indicate anything that would have affected the outcome of the accident. What it indicated was that our procedures and some of the way we went about doing things needed revision, which we were in the process of doing. We're a different organisation than we were in those days.
Yeah. Mr McCormack, I don't want to interrupt Senator Fawcett's line of questioning, but the memorandum of understanding between the ATSB and CASA states very clearly, clause 4.46, CASA agrees that if a CASA officer is known to have information that could assist the ATSB in the performance of its investigative functions, CASA will undertake to advise the ATSB of the existence of the information. And that it goes on, effectively, that when there's a parallel investigation, CASA will provide the ATSB with a copy of the investigation report. Now, you've breached that MOU, haven't you?
No, Senator, I don't think we have.
On its plain language, you've breached the MOU.
No, Senator, I don't think we have.
But you withheld, for whatever reason, you withheld the Chambers report from the ATSB.
The Chambers report is an internal CASA document, Senator.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Memorandum of Understanding states CASA agrees that if a CASA officer is known to have information that could assist the ATSB in the performance of its investigative functions, CASA will undertake to advise the ATSB of the existence of the information. Are you saying this report wouldn't have assisted the ATSB?
What I'm saying, Senator, is that the Chambers report was not done until we had completed our investigations. In our interactions with the ATSB, we did not give the ATSB any information to influence, on the deliberate point, as I think is under 4.1 of the MOU, that we don't influence their investigation. We completed ours in 2010. It took to 2012 for the ATSB.
Mr McCormack, that is a curious and bizarre interpretation of clause 4.4.6 of the MOU, but I'll hand back to Senator Fawcett. I'll ask you more questions about that later.
Going to that exact point, if you go to section 4.1 of the Chambers report, it states that it's likely that many of the deficiencies identified after the accident would have been detectable through interviews with line pilots and through the conduct of operational surveillance of line crews, in addition to the surveillance of the management checks. It strikes me that the Chambers report is quite specific, and it's only one example. There's a number of other areas where it's fairly clear that there were deficiencies in the oversight that, had they been addressed through effective audit, that the accident may well have been prevented. Now, the point, though, Mr McCormack, is not so much to say the surveillance was deficient, therefore the world was about to end. The point is that whilst commissioning the Chambers report was commendable upon your taking control of the organisation, for the public to have confidence that there is transparency and due process, where there is a report in existence, a formal report conducted by a senior manager, it would be the expectation of the public, and indeed, as Senator Xenophon has pointed out, it's clearly highlighted in the MOU, that information pertinent to an investigation by ATSB would be made available. And the whole concept of systems approach, whereby not only the operator and the pilot in command, but the regulator are key parts of the safety system, where there is written evidence in the possession of one department prior to the publication, in fact prior to even the review of the draft report coming out, it seems inappropriate to the committee that the spirit and the letter of the MOU was not implemented to make that information available.
Well, Senator, as I've said, the CASA Chambers report, in fact, was a report that I started. It did not even require to be done. It was not something which was
And
in
Mr.
our normal
McCormick,
procedures following the MOU.
We actually appreciate the fact that you started it. Our concern is the fact that having initiated the report, having it in your possession, that it was not then made available, as required by the MOU, in writing, let alone in spirit, to assist the ATSB with their subsequent investigation.
Well, Senator, it's a balancing act here between what is required to be provided to the ATSB and what is an internal CASA document. I took the view that that did not in any way, the Chambers report, should not be influencing ATSB in their deliberations. We were very, very specific in not allowing our report or any of our information being available to the ATSB where we had reached conclusions in a parallel investigation. In actual fact, we did not provide our report, all the accident report and our special audit reports until we received Section 32 demands from the ATSB, which we did receive on the 25th of March 11 and the 3rd of August 12 respectively. I'm very, very aware that we did not want a contagion effect onto the ATSB. We conducted this in the best possible way we could. We did it with the most probity and the best goodwill that we could muster at the time. Now, in retrospect, should the ATSB have an internal CASA document, that's something that I'll take away and consider again. I don't think that we're in violation of the MOU and that we provided the information as we were required, and we were scrupulous in avoiding telling the ATSB our conclusions or where our investigation was going. Parallel investigation for different reasons. As I think Mr. Dolan has said before, he did not want to be involved in a CASA inquiry, nor was he inquiring into possible regulatory breaches or effects that rightly fall under our jurisdiction. So in a lot of ways, to release that report would in fact have put, I would think, the ATSB in a different position. Now that's a question you can ask Mr. Dolan, but from my point of view, if I put myself in Mr. Dolan's shoes, that would have given me a great deal of difficulty from the point of view of establishing my line of inquiry and my line of decision.
If I could.
No, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to follow up on this point. We'll come later to the issues of collaboration, I'll use that word, as opposed to cooperation between the ATSB and CASA. But there is evidence and documents that we will discuss that indicates there was relatively frequent and open discussion about the content of reports and alignment between the two organisations, and yet a report that A, would obviously embarrass CASA, was not made available despite other interactions that go contrary to what you've just stated. And secondly, the ATSB report, for example, on the issue of fatigue, almost discounts fatigue because they say there is a lack of evidence that this is a serious safety concern, and they take the fact that there have been audits done of the FRMS system used by the company. In the audit that CASA put together, it says it's considered, this is CASA's own words, it is considered that the oversight by CASA has been inadequate, as there is evidence to support that many of the problems identified by CASA during the surveillance audit of March 08 were never appropriately actioned. There is a lack of any clear evidence to support corrective actions have been implemented, confirmed by CASA, or that they are effective. If this process is indicative of broader practices of CASA, it's considered that CASA is exposed to unnecessary risk, particularly if required to provide evidence to support how it approves and operates a system, in this case, their FRMS. Now, given that the ATSB chose to ignore the whole issue of fatigue and how that might have affected the errors that were made by the pilot, and they did that because of a lack of evidence, and CASA had a formal report within their system dealing with the issue of fatigue and chose not to disclose that to the ATSB as required by the MOU, I think, Mr. McCormick, you'd have to agree, would seem a little unusual to the reasonable man in the street.